Okay. Hello, I am Sam Whitley, and I am a school psychologist in Illinois. And I'm here with my dear colleague, Dr. Henry Bass.
Hi, I'm Henry Best. I'm a psychologist at Thriving Minds Behavioral Health in Brighton, Michigan.
And we are going to speak to you about briefly about the impact of sleep hygiene um, generally on student behavior and academic achievement. And so when we think about, we try to contextualize sleep hygiene and its impact in the school setting and how do we remediate the related issues. One thing to bear in mind is that as teachers, to specifically address sleep hygiene issues, we're going to have to be able to be a conduit to disseminate this information that we're going to provide to you to our parents, because remediating this issue is going to take place primarily in the home setting. We will give you some strategies and some tools that could be implemented in the school setting. But as we talk about this and as you're listening, bear in mind that this information is primarily best suited to go into your toolbox to help educate parents to improve their students' sleep hygiene. So without further ado,
All right, so first we'll be talking about just the purpose of sleep. So it's kind of maybe obvious to everyone that sleep's important, but some of the reasons it's important is not just for physical, but for mental health as well. It is an essential function that helps us to sort of recharge, regain energy, but also can be helpful for our immune systems. And then when there's a significant lack of sleep, those important functions can really be impacted negatively. So it can have a significant impact on concentration, clarity of thought, memory, and for children, those concerns can be even more problematic because when these sort of issues can arise, it may look like other problems such as ADHD or behavioral problems or learning and academic problems, when sometimes it may just come down to a lack of sleep. So because children who don't receive that adequate sleep will see reduced attention, difficult behaviors in school. They'll have a difficult time with learning, and just their overall mental and physical health will be involved in this, will go down as well in this process too. So some important information about sleep. So looking at length of time for sleep. So I hear this question with the children from the parents I work with and their children. So for a typical adult, 7 to 9 hours of sleep is a good range. And then the amount of sleep that is recommended does change, of course, with age. So babies needing the most amount of sleep from 12 to 16 hours, and then that reduces by a few hours every few years. So toddlers 11 to 14, younger children 10 to 13 is recommended, and then older children 9 to 12, and teenagers about 8 to 10 hours is what's recommended. Now, a lack of sleep can come about in numerous ways, and finding out what is contributing to the lack of sleep is essential in problem-solving ways to improve it. So first off, just looking at, are there any physical problems that may be contributing to the lack of sleep, such as sickness, diet, allergies? Ruling those things out first is a good place to start. Then going into maybe some environmental changes. Are there loud noises outside if you live near a busy road? Is there a new sibling in the house who might be crying at night? Are you in a new home that, because it is an unfamiliar environment, may be contributing to your child's lack of sleep? But then also things like schedule changes or other sorts of stressors. So inconsistent bedtimes is a big problem that a lot of families can face, and consistency is one of the best things that can be done to help improve a child's sleep hygiene. And then also things like anxieties about what could be occurring the next day, whether there's a test coming up or maybe a peer at school that they want to avoid or have problems with. And then also just not prioritizing sleep. If there's other things that are more important to them, such as playing video games, watching TV, hanging out with the family, anything else that might be more motivating for them to avoid sleep.
As Henry alluded to previously, there is a whole host of possibly related and contributing impacts of sleep on students' general functioning and overall health. And so just want to take some time to elucidate some of those possible impacts. And so irritability is a primary concern there. And I think it's important to keep in mind that sleep deprivation can manifest itself in different ways for different individuals. Oftentimes, younger children may seem irritable, and they can become irritable as in response to being tired or a lack of restful sleep. Poor sleep hygiene can result in decreased academic motivation, whether that's primary or secondary to like a general feeling of tiredness, is really unimportant to the conversation because it is a potential impact. Increased rates of obesity or being overweight have also been observed in some students that have poor sleep hygiene, and again, potentially as a result of just the general lethargy or lack of energy that could potentially result from poor sleep hygiene. Poor sleep has been related to or co-occur with some affective disturbances such as increased anxiety, some depressive symptomology. These students who have poor sleep hygiene have also been observed to potentially engage in a higher degree of risk behaviors, risk-taking behaviors such as smoking, alcohol consumption. And it's also been noted that there is generally reduced academic achievement, potentially as the culmination of all those previously mentioned and as a byproduct of sleep disturbances. So now we're going to shift into what do we do? What do we do to positively impact students' sleep hygiene? So going back to what we had mentioned previously, a lot of what we're going to talk about is information. We're going to give you information that you can use to educate the parents of the children in your classroom. So we've kind of collapsed tier 1 and tier 2 strategies together based on your audience is generally going to be the same, but how you communicate or how you engage with those with your audience can change through. You use similar information just in a more targeted manner. So one of the first things that we can do, a universal strategy, is you can advocate for district policy changes around your school day start time, specifically for your middle and high school students. So I think it's something like 90% of the schools that were surveyed by the American Academy of Pediatrics had indicated that they start school prior to 8:30, and the general recommendation by the previously mentioned professional body is that for middle school and high school students, the start time should be 8:30. As students start to enter puberty, there's hormonal changes. They tend to stay up later. And like Henry had talked about, regardless of when they fall asleep, they still require the same amount of sleep to function optimally. And so if the time that you fall asleep is shifting later, then correspondingly, the time that you have to wake up and go to school should probably shift as well. Another tier 1, tier 2 strategy is it's important that if you suspect or you know that a student's behavior is significantly impacted by the amount of sleep that they receive during the night, it's important to establish a solid line of communication with your parents, with those parents, because that can help you plan accordingly for school days in which maybe that student's routine was upset and they didn't get as much sleep as they would have normally, which may impact their behavior. So it can help teachers plan accordingly, maybe be a little less rigid with some disciplinary measures or things along those lines. It can help the teacher adapt their behavior to better facilitate the student's learning in response to the sleep disturbance. Another strategy right here is just a general literature dispersal. And what we mean by that is getting this information in the hands of all your parents. So that could be something that you put on a protocol that can list out the core components of some of the things we're going to talk about within the following slides. And that could be given out during the course of parents registering their students at the outset of the school year. So that can give them time to establish those routines before the students start the school year. And then finally, it may behoove schools to really emphasize parent training sessions. And so what we mean by that, this could be something where you have like a parent cafe or some sort of voluntary event where parents can come into the school setting and they can talk to you or they can talk to other folks that are well versed in addressing sleep concerns and actually get that information in like more of a small group setting. So that way they can get the general information that we're going to provide that Dr. Bass is going to talk about in the following slides, but then you can also give ample time for them to ask individualized or specific questions to their context. So now Dr. Bass will talk about some core components of those parent training meetings.
Yeah, so a lot of what I do is working with parents, actually, especially when it comes to things like sleep and for younger children. And so some of the people listening in, maybe aside from working with parents and children, maybe you'll have children of your own who might be exhibiting some sleep difficulties. So maybe this will be helpful in that context as well. But hopefully this will be helpful for, as Sam had mentioned, working with parents. So first off, I mentioned earlier is the importance of consistency. So turning bedtime into a consistent routine is, in my mind, one of the best things that can be done for addressing some sleep concerns. That means prioritizing sleep, that was mentioned before. And then having a winding down routine. So what that might mean is before bed, around 30 minutes at minimum to around 60 minutes before bed, turning off electronics, maybe having some quiet activities that are allowed, like reading a book, start getting PJs on, brushing teeth, going to the bathroom, avoiding caffeinated drinks. That should probably stop before that 60-minute time, but then also actually maybe reducing beverages as a whole can be helpful. I know before I've worked with families where they find out that the child is chugging glasses and glasses of water before bed, and then that causes them to wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and then can lead to some inconsistent sleep patterns. If the child does awake during the night, though, I think quite honestly, one of the biggest concerns I face with parents when it comes to this is not giving the child attention during that time, or giving them as little attention as possible. And if they are given attention during that time, it's teaching the child indirectly that by causing a little bit of some noise and disturbance, that they get attention and they can avoid sleep for a little bit longer. But if you just walk them back to the room and kind of give as little attention as possible, it's going to be very helpful at getting that routine. Because I mean, unless it is a genuine emergency, the child's probably fine and will be okay. And I think a lot of parents seem to have a hard time with that part of it. And then setting a wake up time for when a child's allowed to leave the room. So this is another concern that I hear quite a bit is, well, my child wakes up at 4 a.m. and they want to run around the house and everything while I'm still trying to sleep. And it is so important. I think for the parents that they're getting enough sleep as well. And I know with children that can be difficult, but that they're getting sleep. And if you, so when a child is having a hard time sleep, a lot of times other members of the family are having a hard time sleeping, and that's going to impact not just the child's performance at school, but what was mentioned before, that parent-teacher collaboration. I mean, it can, if I working with a parent who is already going to be on edge because they're not getting enough sleep themselves, will make that collaborative process more difficult. And so if the parent is able to get that good sleep as well, that can be helpful. And having a wake up time is one way to do that. Instead is, having a rule where the child has to stay in their room until a certain time. And if they wake up before that time, they can play quietly in the room. And then just a few other strategies that can help them relax and calm down: dimming the lights, having a warm bath. As I mentioned, maybe having a glass of water, but still being careful with that. Those are other things that can be helpful too. Now, a few other things to try. So first off, with gradual adjustments, this is not going to be, you're not going to see change, no pun intended, you're not going to see change overnight here. It will be a gradual process. And I mean, if you go into it knowing, or if the parent is able to go into the process knowing that it's going to be a gradual process, it'll be much better for them to sort of make some of these changes here and really focus on just making kind of small changes and looking at little bits of progress here. So that might be things like if a child is playing video games a lot at night, starting by slowly cutting down the amount of time that they're playing video games at night, or we will mention a little bit later, like using bedtime passes or things like that. But that is a strategy where the child can wake up and leave the room a few times, but you're limiting the amount of times that maybe they can leave the room in the night. So just small adjustments like that are a good way to start. The cry out method. So this goes sort of back into what I was saying earlier about just walking the child back to the room and not giving them as little attention as possible. If the child is crying and making noise, sometimes maybe even screaming bloody murder, letting them cry it out. That's a good rule of thumb, not just for bedtime, but for other parts of raising a child. Because if it is not an emergency, then by giving attention to crying out is reinforcing them avoiding sleep and getting out of bed and delaying that time that they could be getting sleep. I've already said a million times, consistency in routines. I cannot emphasize that enough, how important that is. And then avoiding negotiations. So with negotiations, that is also giving attention, and you're feeding into again that avoidance for bedtime. The negotiation process. So if you're telling your child, if the parent's telling the child go to bed in 10 minutes, the child says make it 20, and then you start going back and forth on 15 and 17. What not only is the child, kind of setting the rules on how much time they have by getting you to negotiate with them, but the process of negotiating is delaying bedtime. And so having any sort of back and forth with the child, whether it's right before the bedtime routine, or you've gotten them into the bedroom and they keep getting up and leaving and saying that they need a snack, or they need to go to the bathroom, or they want to go to sleep in the parents' room, or things like that. Those are all things that are negotiations, and in the long run will cause more problems with sleeping. And then a sleep diary for parents. So this is tracking data, or having data that you can track progress on is very helpful in sort of diagnosing some of the problems that might be occurring. And so a sleep diary, we have an example here, helps structure and what's happening, or helps kind of create some structure for the parents to follow and can give the professional or the parent a better idea of what might be happening. So when did the child go to bed? You could see if there's like on that alone, is there consistency in the bedtime routine? Is it what, like some days they're going to bed at 8:40 and other days they're going to bed at 10? And you can ask questions of why on this day did they go to bed at 10 o'clock and this day they went to bed at 8:40? Were they, did you guys go see a movie late at night? Did you have a late dinner? Was it just the kid was running around the house all crazy? But it could help find maybe an issue there. How long did it take for them to fall asleep? And so that could help provide information in a number of ways. So if it took them an hour to fall asleep, is it because they were tossing and turning all night? And so there we can maybe diagnose that it might be something wrong with the bed or the environment, or was the child running around and or before they got tired enough to go to bed, and then it might be an issue of, well, maybe too much caffeine, or there's other sources of energy that were contributing. And then other things here, like what were the times of the duration of each time they woke up, when did they get out of bed, so on and so forth. Did they take naps throughout the day, those kinds of things. So these are all potential areas that we can look at and help diagnose what the problem might be. And it's good for the parent to also sort of break it down and put it onto paper. So looking at establishing some routines. So I find that we've talked about bedtime routines already, but having routines throughout the day can be extremely helpful for going through about all these different changes, because it makes things predictable, and you have that structure for the child that, that structure is law. And so when I talk to parents about structure and routine, one of the best things I can do to get them on board with it is talk about school. Do these problems that you see at home, do they occur at school? And a lot of times the answer is no, like they do. The child tends to do a lot better at school. And the reason for that is because there's consistency and there's routine and structure, that every single day at this time, the child goes to this class or works with this teacher, has this thing to work on. And there's no real deviation from it, and the child does fine. And so extending that routine outside of school just seems it's the next logical step. And then from there, you can extend the routine into bedtime. And when you establish that routine, depending on the age of your child, you can talk about shared responsibilities, but you can have these but having clear and appropriate expectations is at any age a very key ingredient in this process. So what that means, and this is something that I think a lot of people have a challenge of, what do we mean by clear and appropriate? And so one example I hear a lot is, an expectation for the child is that they maintain a clean room. What does a clean room look like? Is that the bed is made? Is that clothes are, put away or in the hamper, toys are put away on their shelves, so on and so forth. Are there dishes in the room that need to go down in the kitchen? And when you have an expectation like that, maybe what you find is that it's not really as clear and it's or appropriate, because telling a child to have maybe a clean room, and they are in a clean room, is all these different elements, then it can be overwhelming, and it can be a lot for them to manage, even though it might seem simple to the or straightforward to the adult. And so one thing you do is break it down into manageable steps. So with a bedtime routine, it's not just get ready for bed and then go to bed. It could be turn off the TV in 10 minutes, go brush your teeth, put on your PJs, get into bed, or go to your bedroom, read a book, go to bed. So it's breaking it up into smaller steps that are easier for the child to follow and kind of keep up with, and can also help. But another way it can also be helpful is by, again, diagnosing the problem. Like, is it, are there certain steps that are more difficult for the child to follow than others? And then we can kind of work on that. And the last part here, praising each success. It's very important that when we're working on building skills, that we are recognizing progress. And if a parent has a child who is not going to bed, and that we want them to go to bed, then if there's any sort of progress, like they go from arguing and yelling before bed and they're not sleeping to, well, now they went to their bedroom without arguing, but they're still not sleeping. That's still progress, because now they're in an environment where they're more likely to fall asleep than they were before. So now they're in their bedroom, whereas before they were out in the living room or something arguing with the parents. And so, while we're not quite there yet in our goal of getting them to fall asleep and stay asleep, it's a step in the right direction. So praising them for things like that. So if a parent tells a child, go to bed in 10 minutes, and the child says, okay, and then goes to bed or starts getting ready for bed after 10 minutes, even if they don't go to bed right away, that's a success right there, and needs to be praised. And then, because it's going to make it more likely to happen again in the future. All right, so, and then some other helpful strategies for establishing these routines. Sticking to a bedtime and wake time that's appropriate for you and for your child based on their age and the sleep schedule, the amount of sleep that we talked about earlier. Consistency again, even on weekends. That one, I mean, it's hard for me too, the consistent sleep on weekends, but is a huge favor anyone can do for themselves is if you wake up at the same time on the weekdays to get ready for work, as much fun as it is to sleep in, going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time will make it way easier in the future to continue that schedule, once the weekdays start again. And it's the same for children. So if they have to wake up and go to school at the same time, Monday through Friday, and then all of a sudden Saturday they get to stay up till 1 in the morning and they sleep till 3, well, you're gonna have a lot harder time with them waking up on time and going to bed on time on Sunday before the weekdays start again. So having that consistency even on weekends is going to be really helpful with the wake time and sleep time, bedtime. And then we've already talked about just keeping a regular sequence of pre-sleep events. And then a huge tool, I think, for anyone who works with kids is your first then contingency statement. So this is a great strategy for avoiding negotiations and just keeping things clear and simple for a child. Let's say one of the things that your kid is struggling with is that the child is struggling with is that they argue that they want to get a snack before bed too. Now it's this whole argument. So if you were to say first, get your PJs on, then you can have a snack. Then again, you're moving in the right direction. It's giving it's giving some reward for a desired behavior, and so it's going to be more likely that it'll happen in the future with less of a fight. A lot of parents have a difficulty with that. They view it as like bribery or something like of that nature, and it's not bribery. Bribery would be, give me a snack and then I'll go to bed. This is turning it around, and it seems like a superficial detail, but it is a very key element of first you have to do the behavior that we want to see, then you will be rewarded for it. And that's going back again to the praise, like similar sort of reasoning to the praising each success. It seems like a small thing, but it is preferable to maybe what the parent is already dealing with right now, which is fighting and arguing the whole time. And it gets the foot in the door for these things occurring, being more likely to occur in the future. A few other things for helping getting ready for sleep. So I already mentioned turning electronics off prior to routine, avoiding exercise. So uh, that one I think can be really challenging for parents. And if a child is very energetic at night, I do hear, well, maybe it's because they didn't have a way to get all that energy out during the day. That's possible. And so maybe, but during the day, that we can prioritize exercise. But at night, if we're letting them exercise, if we're letting them run around and all that sort of thing, that's just can amp up that tired energy. And should also be asking ourselves, well, what are some other possibilities for this elevated energy? Is it, are they drinking a lot of soda throughout the day and getting caffeine, or is there candy? Are they eating sugary things before bed? And so I get surprised all the time at what those diets might look like in certain households where candy is freely available, and all these other things that could be causing the child to have a lot of energy, not a lack of exercise. Timers are, I think, should be a parent's best friend with some of this stuff. It creates a nice visual for the child, and so visuals are extremely important, especially for younger kids, because it helps us avoid relying on more abstract concepts that we could easily get into arguments with children on, and it just gives a visual. So for instance, telling your child 10 more minutes and then you have to go to bed, to a child, 10 minutes could mean anything. And more than likely, the child has also learned that when mom or dad says 10 minutes, that could be an hour, because mom and dad go off and do their own thing and forget about it. And so there's no true parameters there. It's kind of, it becomes arbitrary. And so having a timer makes it standardized and gives the child a visual also, so they don't have to think. The child is no longer the one who has to be responsible for determining if it's 10 minutes or that 10 minutes have gone past or not. There's lots of great timer options out there. It could be a simple egg timer, but there's some great ones that are even more visual. I think the least successful one is if a parent just pulls out their phone, sets a timer, and then puts it back in their pocket and walks away. It needs to be something that the child can see and can hear when it goes off, to be the most effective. And then things like soothing music or other things that can help wind the child down and help calm them. Those are other strategies that can be helpful getting them ready for sleep. All right, and then helping them get comfortable for sleep. So thinking again about the environmental factors. So having low light, an appropriate temperature, no devices or stimulating objects should be around. So sometimes I mistakenly assume that when electronics are the issue, that it's like they're watching TV in the living room or something of that nature. Lots of kids, though, have TVs in their room, or they have a tablet that they can carry with them into bed. And those are things that can help disturb that comfortable environment because they're stimulating. Or another thing might be if you can get the child into bed and they're fine, but mom or dad or whoever continues to stay up watching TV out in the living room or in a place where it can be heard, and they're playing at a loud volume. And those are behaviors that can contribute to making it an uncomfortable sleep environment for the child. So to have really help work toward increasing likelihood that this is going to be successful, parents need to make some changes as well in their sleep habits. And so either turning the volume down or not having the TV on at all or something of that nature. Not having, if there's bright lights that the child can see through the door and there's people walking by and having loud conversations, those are other things that can be contributing to it. And then with fear of the dark and these common childhood problems, a lot of them can be solved relatively simply by having something like a night light. And There can be also some checks that are integrated into the routine. So with each different step, there might be a check-in and ensuring that things are going smoothly. These are just some other good strategies that can be implemented. Then for safely sleeping, these are just other little environmental things that can be done to help the child out. So avoiding things that can be dangling or easily tripped on, having guardrails for children to move around a lot when they sleep, and then having like extra night lights around for if there is a bathroom trip. Those are other ways to help ensure that the child is being safe at night. So we have talked about a few of these things like limiting liquid intake before bed, but then some other ways to help with independent sleep. White noise machines can be helpful if you live in a loud neighborhood, you can't just pick up the house and move. I personally recently moved into a house and we are way closer to the highway than we thought we were, and white noise machines have been our savior. So those can be extremely helpful for ensuring a good night's sleep. And then having a child go to the bathroom just before bed can be helpful with any sort of helping avoid things like bedwetting or waking up several times throughout the night to go to the bathroom. And then if they are not tired at bedtime, providing them with something that can help calm and some relaxing activity, like potentially reading a book or providing a comfortable item. And then teaching the child how to make their bed. That could be another great strategy to help with independent sleep. And one other thing, I do want to highlight also that can be helpful with independent sleep. So we've talked about like books a few times here. While those are fine in most cases, sometimes those sorts of things can be still problematic in the same vein that or in a similar vein that like having a tablet in bed can be problematic. And one of the reasons for that is if you are in bed, with like a tablet, it's not just stimulating because it's a bright screen, but it's also training your body that bedtime is for entertaining things like looking at my phone, looking at a tablet, reading a book. So some of these strategies I think could be really helpful for parents and other adults who are interested in this material and who might be struggling to sleep. If your bedtime routine looks like relies heavily on some sort of activity until you fall asleep, whether it's watching TV from your bed or reading a book, working on cutting some of those things out can be really helpful for helping with sleep. And so if you have a hard time falling asleep, getting out of bed and going and doing that stuff out of bed, ideally in a different room, can be really helpful. And so if the child's not tired at bedtime and they need a book or something, if there's like a spot in their room, maybe where they can sit, that might be a better alternative, but that's not an option for a lot of people. And so a book is still preferable to a tablet or TV, but that's just something to keep in mind if there are some other issues with sleep.
So now we have arrived to our tier 3, which we're considering and we're conceptualizing and we're thinking about sleep hygiene on an individual basis. And so as many of you know, when we reach tier 3 in the school setting, typically some sort of functional behavioral assessment and resulting behavior intervention plan is going to be derived. And while this is not what I necessarily had in mind when I put this on the slide previously, as Dr. Bass was talking, did really start to consider the, completing the FBA in the context of the home setting. So like actually completing a functional behavioral assessment specific to the sleeping behavior. And again, then using that with like the sleep diary to help really target and hone in on some of those areas that Dr. Bass had talked about being missing the consistency, or if there's tablets, stimulation, something along those lines, as being targeted in your behavior intervention plan. What I originally had in mind when I put this on the slide was thinking of a student with some sort of like aggressive behavior or something. And this occurs relatively frequently in the context of my practice, but we complete the FBA. And then as we're completing the FBA, interview the guardian, and in terms of looking for any sort of setting event that could potentially be enhancing the value of the consequence of the behavior. And sleep oftentimes comes up as a potential setting event to target within the behavior intervention plan. And so just real briefly, for anybody who's not familiar with what a setting event is a setting event is it's a malleable state, or it's a malleable occurrence, and then we can alter it, we can change it, that increases the value of a consequence for a behavior. And so when we think in terms of like our ABC, so you've got setting event, which is kind of distal, and then your antecedent, your behavior, and your consequence. And so the setting event really sets the stage or makes this consequence more valuable for that behavior. And so thinking in terms, so what would that something like look, what would a behavior chain look like where sleep would potentially be a setting event? And kind of one of the classic occurrences that comes to my mind in the context of like an FPA with this is that you've got a student who, let's say they got a poor night's sleep, no consistency, they wake up, they're kind of irritable, they come to school and the teacher provides some sort of reprimand or redirection. Then there's some sort of physical aggression towards the teacher. They get sent out of the room. So that irritability, like they didn't want to interact with anybody in the first place. So it enhanced the likelihood that their aggressive behavior would be manifested. So once we've done our functional behavioral assessment, we've identified sleep as a potential setting event, that's when we can, as clinicians or as teachers, then we can follow up with a more specific diagnostic sleep interview to help target some specific areas. And then there's individualized strategies that we can apply to try and mollify the impacts of sleep hygiene on the student's functioning. And Henry will talk about a specific sleep interview that has some utility in the school setting and in the clinic setting. And then he'll also give us an overview of an individualized intervention that teachers can recommend and help teachers and clinicians can recommend and help train the parents to implement in the home setting.
Yeah, so that process that we talked about is called BEARS. It's the sleep screening algorithm, and it's useful for, again, diagnosing some common sleep disorders that can occur in childhood. So BEARS stands for bedtime problems, excessive daytime sleepiness, awakenings during the night, regularity and duration of sleep, and snoring. So these are kind of some 5 major domains that can be used to identify sleep disorders. On the next slide here, we can see sort of an example of what it would look like. So first, like thinking about bedtime problems at different age ranges, what those bedtime problems might look like can take different forms. And so with toddler years, do they have trouble going to bed and falling asleep? And that's going to be more directed at the parent asking parent questions. But then as they get older, we can focus more on talking to the child directly. So at the school age years, we have questions. There's questions for parents, but then also questions for the child, and then an adolescent, mainly for the child to help identify some of these problems. But yeah, we look at other things like, do they seem overtired or sleepy throughout the day? Is there any sleepwalking or nightmares, or other ways that they're getting up throughout the night? Looking at time that they go to bed and the length of time. And then if there's any sort of sleep apnea type issues with snoring and difficulty breathing at night. Now, I did mention earlier, like a bedtime pass. So this is actually one of my favorite strategies to recommend to parents for bedtime concerns. And then these are particularly useful when there's a lot of avoidant behaviors with sleep, and where the child is kind of getting up throughout the night and is getting a lot of attention every time they get up throughout the night. And what this does is it does not it still allows the child to get up throughout the night, but it is simply adding structure to it and adding limitations to it. And so it's not telling the child that they have to quit cold turkey on these things, but that they get a limited number of opportunities to get up throughout the night. And so this is actually has been used in studies. And so in one study, we can see some data on when a bedtime pass was used and then when it was not used. And so you can see during the baseline period that there was we see the overall just decreases in nighttime tantrums. And so tantrums being a sort of a strategy that the child is using to avoid bed. And so we see during the baseline, there's a significant number of tantrums that are occurring throughout the day or throughout the night. And then when a bedtime pass is implemented, an immediate decrease. You do see a slight increase with the top graph there for that child, which can happen. There's different reasons for why some of these behaviors might occur. We see like a big spike that's kind of might be due to sort of an extinction burst. And then when the cards were removed, though, the tantrums increased again, and then when they were brought back, we see another dramatic decrease in tantrums. And so, it can really be emphasized that a lot of these strategies don't need to be complicated. They don't need to be, some mind-blowing, just thing that that changes everything. Something as simple as a few pieces of paper that say bedtime pass, and like for getting a snack or going to the bathroom or getting a drink of water or getting a hug from mom and dad. Those alone can be effective, and it can just be like they get 3 throughout the night, and they can use them without any sort of penalty at any point throughout the night to leave the room. And during that process, the parent can remind them, like, again, well, keep in mind you only got 3 passes. Is this when you want to use it? And the child says yes. You take the pass away, and that is gone for the night. Now, in order for this to be effective for the 100th time in this presentation, consistency is important. And so you implement the bedtime pass, and then the child uses all 3 passes or whatever number has been set, and then they try to get up a 4th time, and the parent allows them to. Then the whole strategy is pointless. It's going to be ineffective, and that's I think we can see that in the data here also. With that top chart, we see that the tantrums did increase at one point in time, and sometimes that could be a symptom of limit testing and seeing if that if there's a way to get out of this new routine. But then when it stays consistent and these rules get learned, these new rules and routines get learned by the child, then the decrease will happen eventually. But this is about gradual changes, and these are not going to happen immediately. It's got to be implemented for multiple nights consistently for these, in most cases, for it to be effective. And if it stops working at some point, or it looks like it's stopping working, like we see in that top chart, that might just be a sign that the child is just trying to break out of the routine. But if you stay consistent, say no, this is part of the plan, then you will see that decrease eventually.
So some further just general individual strategies, like Henry had said, probably, what would you think, Henry? Like 100 times consistency and follow through are key.
Yeah, about that.
Um, and then previous, like Henry had alluded to earlier, providing verbal time cues to help forecast movement into the bedtime routine or movement into the bedroom and sleep time are important. And really just think in terms of our behavioral principles. So planned ignoring around any sort of avoidance behaviors related to going to bed or negative sleep comments is important. And like Henry had talked about previously as well, positive contingent reinforcement for all those sleep behaviors that we want to see. And like Henry had talked about previously as well. So we're thinking in terms of gradual change across time, and providing that positive contingent reinforcement for those small steps can help build behavioral momentum towards our big overarching goal. And then finally here with the exclamation point, rewards. I felt like I should say that with a exclaim. So that's important as well. And so both short-term and long-term rewards could be beneficial. And so those short-term rewards can be in terms of that positive praise, but also then those long-term rewards, a preference assessment, which could be completed by clinician or a teacher with the student, can help inform what would potentially be reinforcing for the student's sleep-related behavior. And if you're unfamiliar with a preference assessment, there's various versions of preference assessments. One of the easiest ones to do with students who are a little more further along in their development is a forced choice preference assessment. So say, so Henry, if you did everything you're supposed to do in relation to your sleep behaviors, you can have this or this, and then the student picks which one they would rather have. And there's all sorts of generic or editable type on versions of preference assessments on the internet through a lot of the PBIS network websites will have preference assessments available for download and use. And then if possible, this is not, instructors are not always able to provide this, but you may consider having sleep time built into the daily schedule. If there's a student that's consistently showing up to your classroom that is lacking sleep, and there are certain administrative rules that may prohibit you from being able to do that, but when able and if possible, that it may be an easy strategy to help the student get a little bit of sleep during the school day to effectively enhance or improve their ability to make academic gains in the classroom. And then finally, if necessary, a medical referral, either to the school nurse, refer to a doctor, or you can point the parents towards, hey, maybe you need to talk to your pediatrician about this, or maybe you could look into a sleep study or something along those lines could also be beneficial for the student. So that concludes the presentation. Henry, is there anything else that you would like to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that came to mind at the end there also is with rewarding and creating some of these structures that we talked about. I think teachers can be, especially for younger children, can be an invaluable resource in that regard. Because one of the things I talk to parents about for some of the younger kids that I see when we're talking about like behavioral strategies at home is, you know, implementing these rewards systems. And so many teachers already have systems like that that they use in their classroom. And I will refer to that, some of those systems to help kind of get the parent on board and kind of get help with planning these systems. And so, as we said, like having that structure and those routines throughout the day, and that can be generalized from school to home and then to bedtime, can be really helpful. And so I think that'd be a great thing that teachers can also talk to parents about, of kind of sharing ideas and collaborating on how can we keep this these behaviors or this progress going from school to home and then from home back to school. And so that's another great thing I think to maybe keep in mind.
All right. Thank you, everyone.